KimberleeB. We're doing Simplicity 8642 today. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is take our piece 1 and piece 2, starting from the shoulder, and you're going to stay stitch that edge. So you're just doing a straight stitch. Okay, now we're gonna make our darts, and you should have markings there for your darts. And what I always do is I take the point and this point and I fold it, and then I pin on the line. It's almost always perfectly lined up. So you're gonna go ahead and you're gonna sew your dart, following on your marking. And when you come to the edge, you're going to go very scant to that edge and off the fabric. And then you're going to, I just double knot this. You don't want to go back and forth. You don't want to do a back stitch. So I'm just going to double knot this here. Both sides. Okay, now we're gonna take this to our ironing board and we're gonna press our darts down. Okay, so I have my 2 inches of elastic cord and I'm placing it at the marking, the dot from the pattern, and I'm just gonna stitch across this. You wanna make sure you're holding it exactly in that spot. Cording can sometimes be kind of a problem, or you could just sew on a make your own loop. Sewing the seam in my center back, and I've pinned up to the dot. Okay, now I'm using a gingham, so it has stripes, so I'm lining up my stripes. But if you are working with stripes like me, you definitely want to try to line them up. Okay, I went ahead after I sewed my center seam of my back and I serged my edges and I pressed my seams open. You don't have to serge, you can use pinking shears or, excuse me, or you can use a zigzag stitch on the edge, but I went ahead and did that. With the right sides together, I'm going to pin my shoulders starting at the notches, and then I'm going to sew in a 5/8 inch and serge my seam allowances. So you want to serge the edge of your seam, those allowances that are left over. Do this to both sides, and then you're going to press them open. Right side's facing in, okay? So you have your, you're attaching your front and your back at the shoulders, right sides facing each other. Okay, so we have stitched our shoulder seams, serged them, and then pressed them open. Add my fusible interfacing to my front facing piece and my back facing pieces. Now I'm going to stitch my center back seam, line up my notches, and I'm going to pin from the lower edge and stop at the marking. Okay, so I've pinned from the bottom edge and my marking stopped here. So you want to pin this center and stop at the marking. We're going to stitch 5/8 inch. Okay, so I've pressed open underneath the marking, so the opening, and I've pinned my shoulders together. So now I'm going to stitch in a 5/8 inch seam allowance, my shoulder seams. I did not serge my seam allowances, but I did press them open. So we're going to go ahead and finish off our outer edges. And you're going to serge them. You're either going to do that or follow the instructions and fold over and make a 1/4 inch narrow hem or zigzag the. So now we are going to attach our facing at our neckline. So we're going to do right sides together. And we're going to find the shoulder seams, line them up and pin them. You want to do the same thing for both shoulders. And your edges in the back. So there are notches here. Line those up and pin them. Do that all the way around. You're going to pin the back opening. You're going to go as far as you can and pin that down. And then you're going to stop at the dot. So make sure that this is sewn and stops at the dot here and pin. You're going to pin that. Okay, so you're going to do that to both sides and then fit in the neckline here. Once you have both of your shoulder seams pinned, you'll just pin and fit everything in nice. Okay, so now I'm going to sew the facing to the collar area, the neckline, and I have the under portion pushed out of the way, and you'll see that it meets at a point here, okay? So this is the back opening now. So I'm gonna make sure everything is smooth, and I'm gonna lay it down on my machine, and I'm going to start right at the end where the stitching stops, where the pin is. We're doing 5/8 of an inch, and you want to just line that up as even as possible, making sure that everything is nice and smooth underneath. Okay, and we're going to sew all the way around. The neckline. You're going to pivot at your corner. And sew all the way around the same way. And when you get to the other side, you're going to do the same thing. You're just going to backstitch here to finish on this side, okay? Okay, we're coming to the other side, the very end now. I'm just going to meet up with that prior stitching. Do not stitch past the stitching because you want to be able to fold that V, that lining back in, and have like that pointed V in the middle of the back, nice and smooth. Okay, after checking your neckline to make sure everything is nice and smooth all the way around, you're going to, I'm going to use pinking shears, and I'm going to trim my seams all the way around the neckline. on the curved portion of the neckline. Make sure you're checking that you're not cutting your shirt. Be really careful. And then we're going to understitch. So you're going to turn your collar out. This is that elastic that we put in. Okay. So we're going to turn our facing to the inside of our top. And you are going to understitch now. This needs to go on the inside. Getting our corners. Get all our corners. Okay. So we're going to come back and we're going to understitch. So we're going to make sure that this facing that we've trimmed, the seam allowance here, is facing the facing. So press towards the facing. And you're going to bring it in and just go back as far as possible. It doesn't have to be all the way to the edge. And now you're going to stitch right on the edge of this, where the facing and the front of the shirt and back of the shirt meet, that seam line. Okay, so you're going to go right to that seam line, making sure that you're constantly checking to make sure that your facing is laying towards this. I'm sorry, your seam allowance underneath is laying towards the facing. Now you're just going to stitch. Making sure to curve where your shirt curves and that everything lays nice and smooth. Okay, so I have serged, I've understitched all the way around the neckline, and then I've pressed everything and pinned at the shoulders and the back neck opening edge, because we need to tack that by hand. Okay, so right now we're going to go ahead and tack down, so by hand here, and make sure it does not show through the front. You're just going to catch the piece of this seam allowance here with this lining. Okay, so you're going to tack this, tack the shoulders, and then we're going to sew the button on the front. So we have our shoulders tacked down and the back piece of the lining tacked down. We have our button sewn on, and we're just gonna hook that. Now we are going to sew our side seams. So you want to find your notches and do your best to line up your stripes. And we're gonna pin all the way down our side seam. Both sides down. We're going to stitch in a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Press my seams open, serge them. Now we have to do the hem. The hem allowance is 1 1/4 inch. This, as you will notice on the pattern envelope, is a very short type of top. It looks like it stops slightly above the waistline. It's very short. I do not want my top to be that short on me. I want it to stop at my waist or slightly below. So I'm going to just do a narrow hem on this, a 5/8 inch. So I'm gonna do a long stitch, but you could do the 1 1/4 inch. If you wanted your top to be short, you would do it the same way as the directions state. Okay, so I'm gonna be doing a 5/8 inch narrow hem on this. So I'm just gonna mark the depth of my hem with a long machine stitch. Okay, so I've marked the depth of my hem. I'm going to do a narrow hem, so I'm simply going to iron down where this marking is from the stitching, iron that down, and then fold this in to meet. So when I do my hem, it will look like our hem. And I've done a narrow 5/8 inch. Okay, so now we've done our hem, and I'm gonna go ahead and pull those basting type stitches out. I'm going to iron my hem, and now I'm going to start applying my bias tape. Okay, so you're gonna take your single fold 1/2 inch wide bias tape, and you're gonna fold the beginning edge down just a little bit, maybe 1/4. And then you're just gonna follow the curve of the sleeve. We're working on right sides facing out. So I've turned my blouse towards the right side. It was inside out. And we're just gonna apply the tape. You don't wanna stretch the armhole at all. You just wanna follow the curve of the armhole and pin. You're gonna do this all the way around. When you come to the end, you want to extend a little bit, but you're gonna leave that piece up, okay? So I'm gonna bring it a little long and clip it. We can trim that down so that we lift this up and we start sewing here. Okay, so now we've pinned the bias tape. So we're just gonna stitch in a 3/8 inch or a 1 centimeter hem allowance. I'm gonna do this all the way around for both sleeves. So I'm gonna take my time and sew with this straight piece lapping over the piece that we did that has the fold. I'm going to use my pinking shears now to trim that seam allowance down. Okay, so I'm going to change the thread on my machine now to white. And I'm going to make sure that I press up with my finger this seam allowance underneath. So it needs to be pressed up towards the bias tape. And I'm going to understitch. I'm just going to stitch along near this edge. This facing to the inside. Okay. I'm going to turn my shirt inside out. And I'm going to turn my facing to the inside. And I'm going to pin. Okay, so we've pinned it and we're going to start sewing now. Very carefully, as straight as possible. Right along the edge. And again, notice that I have white thread to match the white bias tape. And my top side is the same color as the stitching I've been using, that lavender. The sleeve, I guess you would call this. It's like a flutter sleeve. So at the very top of our sleeve, we're going to press down actually 1/4 inch. Then we're going to sew right on the edge of that 1/4 inch. You're gonna do this all the way through for both tops of sleeves. Then you're gonna take your scissors and you're gonna trim right up to that stitching. Now you might wanna get really small scissors, but take your time because you don't wanna catch in the fabric underneath and end up cutting it. Okay, after you've trimmed all the way to the stitching, all the way around, you're gonna take about 1/8 of a fold here. So you're gonna fold that over about 1/8 inch. And then you're going to sew right on the edge of that. Okay, so this is very narrow. And try not to stretch the fabric as you sew. You just want to try to sew right on that edge. Okay, so now we have our narrow hem at the top, and I'm going to put in my marking for a 3/8 inch hem on each side. And I'm doing a very loose, long stitch, like a basting stitch. Okay. Do the lower end. Okay, so I have pressed over 3/8 inch on each side, and then I'm going to start with my corners, and it is open like this, right? And then your 3/8 inch goes into here and to here. All right, but you have to fold under those seams, right? So it can't be exposed on the inside. So I'm going to fold in here at the point, fold over to meet my marking. So my stitching is here, fold over to meet my marking, fold in again. Okay, then I'm going to pin it there. And then I'm going to do the same thing with this side, fold over to meet my marking, and then fold in again. Okay. So you have a point here, and your edges are all finished because they're folded on the inside. All right, so I'm going to pin there. Now you have to make sure all along this whole way, on the sides and the bottom, that your fold meets the stitching line that you've pressed, and then you will turn it over. Okay, so all of this, the whole way down the front, I'm sorry, the bottom and the sides will get folded in and pinned. Then we'll come back, and I'm probably going to start here at the top and stitch all the way around. Sleeve, flounce, rolled into a narrow 3/8 inch hem all the way around. Okay, so I'm going to start with this side. And I have not taken out my threads that mark the depth of my hem. I'll pull those out later. So we're gonna start here on the corner. Okay, so now we're gonna take the flounce. We've pressed our hems down, everything is stitched on all sides, and we're going to make our pleats. So you're gonna find your marking, and you're going to fold along that marking, and then you're going to bring that fold to the line. So you might not be able to see it, my marking is faint, but you should have markings on your pattern piece. I'm gonna take a long needle now, not a short one, and pin it. And I like to make sure everything is nice and even. Then you're gonna find the next one, fold it, bring it to that marking, and then pin it. There's 3 pleats on this side, okay? So you'll do your third one, then you'll do the same with the other side. Flounce or sleeve should look like this when you're finished. Okay. Everything should be pleated and pinned, all right? Because it's gonna be much easier to pin the sleeve flounces on if I have it on a dress form. So you, the pattern instructions tell us to baste those stitching lines. I didn't do that. but you can follow that. But what I did do is I have markings underneath here, and I also marked the top very faint. So I matched up my sleeve with those markings on the front and the back. And you see here's our elastic little button loop. And then I went and took my chalk and I just darkened that line a little bit so that when I do sew it, it will match up nicely. I did not baste it, but you can do that, okay? So now we're just gonna go ahead and stitch. Okay, so make sure that everything is nice and smooth. You're gonna go underneath your shirt and make sure your facing is smooth and laying flatly, because you're going to have to sew on top of it, okay? Flatly, I don't think that's a word, but laying flat. So I'm gonna start at the dots and I'm going to back stitch there. And then I'm just gonna follow that stitching line that I traced over, darker. You're just gonna take your time. And when I come to a needle, I'm gonna pull my needle out. And you wanna stitch on that curve, but again, you're checking to make sure everything is smooth.